Hello. Welcome to the Daily Life Stories channel. On a cold, fateful, rainy night, a young woman stands at the gate of a quiet farm with a small suitcase and a marriage she never chose. Step with me into this story, where a meeting that seems like fate hides a secret that has been waiting for many years. A rainy night at the farm gate. The rain had already been falling for hours. Cold, slow, relentless, it slid down the wooden fence posts, soaked the gravel road, and dripped from the bare branches of the trees that surrounded the farm. The kind of rain that made the world feel quieter than usual. Loveless. At the end of the long dirt road stood a large wooden gate. Behind it stretched acres of farmland, shadowed barns, and a large farmhouse whose windows glowed softly with warm yellow light. And standing in front of that gate was a young woman. She held a small suitcase. Old, scuffed, the leather peeling at the corners. Everything she owned was inside it. Her coat was thin for the weather. Rain had already soaked through the fabric, clinging to her arms and shoulders. But she did not knock. Not yet. She simply stood there, waiting, or maybe gathering the courage to take one more step, because a few minutes earlier another door had closed behind her. Not this gate. A different door. The door of the house where she had grown up. It had closed quietly, without shouting, without tears, without anyone coming after her. The last thing she heard before the door shut was her stepmother's voice. Flat, practical, almost relieved. If you marry him, the debt will disappear. That was all. No one asked if she wanted to marry him. No one asked if she was afraid. No one asked if she even knew the man waiting behind this gate. Because in that house her opinion had never mattered. Maybe some of you watching have felt something like that before. Have you ever been in a room full of family and still felt like you did not belong there, like your presence only mattered when someone needed something from you? She shifted the suitcase from one hand to the other. The handle was digging into her fingers. The rain grew heavier. Still, the gate remained closed. She looked down the long road behind her. No lanterns, no footsteps, no one coming to say goodbye. Her younger sister had not even looked at her when she left. And just before she stepped outside, her stepmother had leaned close and whispered something that stayed with her even now. At least this way you will be useful for once in your life. The words echoed louder than the rain. Useful. That was what she had always been. Not a daughter. Not really family. Just someone who cooked the meals, washed the clothes, scrubbed the floors, worked in the fields when the harvest came. And now, apparently, she was useful one more time, useful enough to erase the debt her family owed. She exhaled slowly. A cloud of breath rose into the cold night air. Somewhere inside the farmhouse, a light flickered as if someone had moved past the window. He was in there. The man she was supposed to marry. She knew almost nothing about him. Only rumors. People in the village spoke about him in low voices. The owner of the largest farm in the valley. A man who rarely came to town. Quiet. Reserved. Cold. Some said he had become wealthy very quickly. Others said he simply preferred the company of land and animals over people. No one ever mentioned a wife. Until now. Until tonight. The rainwater dripped from her hair as she stared at the gate. A strange thought crossed her mind. What if she turned around? What if she simply walked back down the road and kept walking until morning? But the moment the thought appeared, it disappeared just as quickly. Because she already knew the answer. If she left, the debt would return. Her father would lose the house. and somehow even then they would still blame her. So she lifted her hand and knocked. The sound of her knuckles against the wood was small, almost lost in the rain. For a moment nothing happened. Then, slowly, the gate creaked open. The hinges groaned softly. Warm yellow light spilled out from inside the courtyard. And there he was, the man she had come to marry. He stood beneath the porch roof, where the rain could not reach him. Tall, still, one hand resting against the wooden frame of the open gate. The lamplight behind him cast long shadows across the ground. She could not clearly see the expression on his face at first, but she felt his eyes on her, studying her. Not with cruelty, not with warmth either, just quiet attention, as if he were confirming something, like a person looking at a long-awaited arrival. Neither of them spoke. The rain filled the silence between them. She lowered her gaze first, partly from habit, partly because she suddenly felt very aware of how small she must look standing there with a single suitcase. Finally, he stepped forward, close enough now that the light reached his face. His expression was calm, serious, but something about his eyes seemed almost familiar, not in a way she could place. Just a strange feeling she could not explain. "You must be cold," he said quietly. His voice was steady, not harsh, not particularly warm either, just measured. She nodded. "Yes." Another silence passed. Then he stepped aside. "Come inside." That was all he said. No formal greeting, no questions, no mention of the marriage. Just an open doorway and warm light. For a moment she hesitated at the threshold. Crossing that doorway meant something permanent. It meant leaving one life behind, even if that life had never truly belonged to her. She tightened her grip on the suitcase and stepped inside the gate. The rain immediately sounded softer behind her, almost distant. The courtyard smelled faintly of hay and wet earth. Somewhere nearby, a horse shifted inside a stable. The farmhouse door opened and warm air drifted out toward them. Still, he watched her. And again that strange feeling returned, as if he were looking at someone he had known for a very long time. But she was certain she had never met him before. Have you ever had that feeling? When someone looks at you, not like a stranger, but like a memory. She set her suitcase down near the doorway. Sorti 9, but Teking Caden the 7th. Dinapa the 9, Caden the 7th. On, Teking Caden, Dinapa the 7th. Teking Caden. The wood of the porch creaked beneath her wet shoes. For a brief moment she wondered what kind of life waited for her here. Would she simply become another worker on this farm? Cooking? Cleaning? Working from sunrise to nightfall just like before? Perhaps that would not be so different after all. But one thought still lingered in her mind, a quiet question she could not push away. Why would a wealthy man agree to marry someone like her, a girl whose own family treated her like a servant? What possible reason could he have? The rain continued falling behind the gate. The lantern beside the door flickered softly in the wind. And before she could ask any of the questions circling her thoughts, the man spoke again, his voice lower this time, almost reflective. "You can leave the suitcase there," he said. "Everything you need is already inside." She looked up at him in surprise. "Everything I need." He held her gaze for a moment, longer than before, as if measuring whether he should say more. But then he simply turned toward the open door. "Come in. The house is warm." She followed him inside. But as the door closed behind them, another thought lingered quietly in the night air. A thought she could not possibly know yet. Because the truth was this: The man standing in that farmhouse doorway had not chosen her by accident. He had not agreed to this marriage out of convenience, or charity, or obligation. He had been watching her for years, silently, from a distance, waiting for the moment when he could finally bring her somewhere safe. And the strange thing was, she had already met him once before, many years ago, on another rainy night. But she did not remember. Not yet. And what she would soon discover about that night would change everything she believed about her past, and about the man she had just married. But that truth had not come out yet. Not tonight. Because some stories do not begin with love. Sometimes they begin with silence, and the quiet decision of one person to protect someone even if they never receive credit for it. The question was, when she finally learned the truth, would she see it as kindness or as something much harder to accept? Morning came slowly to the farm. The rain had stopped sometime before dawn, leaving the fields wrapped in a pale silver mist. Dew clung to the grass, and the distant hills looked soft and quiet beneath the rising sun. Inside the farmhouse, the world was already awake. Footsteps moved across wooden floors. A kettle hummed gently on the stove. Somewhere outside, a rooster called across the valley. But in the small bedroom at the end of the hall, the young woman sat upright in bed long before the rest of the house stirred. She had woken before the sun. Not because anyone asked her to, because she was used to it. For years, her mornings had begun the same way. Wake before everyone else. Prepare the fire. Start breakfast. Wash the floors. Finish chores before the others even opened their eyes. So when the faint morning light touched the window, her body reacted automatically. She rose from the bed quietly, almost guiltily, as if someone might scold her for sleeping too late. The room was simple but warm. Clean wooden walls, a small dresser, a window overlooking the fields. But what caught her attention most was the bed. Soft, thick blankets, the kind she had never slept under before. For a moment, she touched the fabric carefully, almost as if she were afraid she might damage it. Then she shook the thought away. No time for that. Work first. She dressed quickly. The clothes waiting for her were folded neatly on the chair. Not old. Not worn. New. Someone had prepared them before she arrived. She paused. Why would they do that? Back home, no one had ever prepared anything for her. If clothes were clean, it was because she washed them herself. Still unsure, she put them on and stepped into the hallway. The farmhouse was quiet, but alive with the gentle sounds of morning. When she reached the kitchen doorway, she froze. 3 people were already inside. A cook, a stable hand, and an older man standing beside the table with careful posture. They all turned when they saw her. For a second, she instinctively lowered her eyes, waiting, expecting instructions, or criticism, or the usual words she had heard her entire life. You are late. Why are you standing there? There is work to do. But instead, the cook smiled politely. Good morning, ma'am. The young woman blinked. Mom. She looked behind her to see if someone else had entered, but the hallway was empty. The older man stepped forward slightly, his voice calm and respectful. Breakfast will be ready shortly. If there is anything you would like, please tell us. Again, she looked around the room, unsure, confused. Who were they talking to? Finally, she spoke carefully. You do not need to call me that. The cook exchanged a brief glance with the older man. Then the older man answered, It is the proper way to address the lady of the house. Lady of the house. The words felt unfamiliar in her ears, almost uncomfortable. She shook her head slightly. "No, I am not. I can help with the cooking." The cook immediately lifted her hands. "Oh no, ma'am, that will not be necessary." But the young woman had already stepped toward the counter. "Where is the bread?" she asked quietly. The cook looked almost distressed. "Please, you do not need to do this." But she had already begun searching through the cupboards, because that was the only way she understood how to exist. If she did not work, she felt out of place, unwanted, invisible. Maybe some of you watching understand that feeling. When someone has spent years believing their value comes only from serving others, it becomes difficult to accept kindness, even when it is offered sincerely. Before the cook could protest again, a voice appeared from the doorway. "Let her help if she wants to." Everyone turned. The farm owner stood there. His presence was quiet but steady. He had already been outside. His boots were dusted with soil and morning frost. For a moment, his eyes moved across the kitchen. Then they rested on her. She immediately straightened, unsure what to do. Should she step back? Should she apologize? But he simply nodded once. "Good morning." "Good morning," she answered softly. He stepped into the kitchen and poured himself coffee. The older man beside the table spoke respectfully. "Sir, the horses have been checked." "Good." Then the farm owner glanced at the young woman again. She was standing near the counter, holding a loaf of bread like someone unsure whether she had permission to touch it. "You do not need to work here," he said calmly. "I know." But her hands tightened slightly around the bread. "I am used to it." He studied her face for a moment, as if trying to understand something deeper than the words she had spoken. Then he nodded. "All right, but no one here will treat you like a servant." The statement was simple, direct, but something in the room shifted slightly after he said it. The cook relaxed. The stable hand returned to his task, and the young woman quietly sliced the bread, still unsure how to behave in this strange place where people treated her with respect. Later that morning, she walked outside. The farm stretched farther than she had imagined. Wide fields rolled across the valley. Barns stood strong against the morning sky. Workers moved steadily between buildings. But something surprised her. When they passed her, they greeted her. "Morning, ma'am." "Good morning." She nodded awkwardly each time, uncertain how to respond. Because in the house where she grew up, the workers barely looked at her. And the family certainly never greeted her. That house had been very different. She could still see it clearly in her memory. Her younger sister laughing at the dinner table while she stood beside the stove waiting to refill plates. Her stepmother giving instructions from across the room. "Wash the clothes. Clean the floor again. You missed a spot." And sometimes when visitors came, her stepmother would speak the words that cut deeper than any chore. If it were not for her, the house would be easier to manage. The girl had stood quietly every time, head lowered, accepting the words as truth. Because when someone hears the same message for years, it eventually becomes part of how they see themselves. She had come to believe one simple thing: her value existed only when she was useful. So when the marriage proposal came, when her family said marrying the farm owner would erase their debt, she had not protested. She had simply nodded, because in her mind, that was the first time she had ever been useful for something important. But the farm was confusing that belief, because here no one treated her like a burden. The workers spoke to her kindly. The cook saved the warmest bread for her. Even the stable hands tipped their hats when she walked by. Yet the one person she could not fully understand was him, the farm owner. He never hovered near her, never forced conversation. but she often felt his presence nearby, watching, observing, not suspiciously, more like someone making sure everything remained safe. That afternoon, she walked toward the stable. The horses shifted gently in their stalls. Sunlight streamed through the wooden slats in the roof. She reached out and stroked the neck of a chestnut horse. Its warm breath filled the air. "You like horses?" She turned. The farm owner stood beside the stall door. "I do," she said quietly. "We had one when I was little." He leaned lightly against the wooden beam. "You worked in the fields?" It was not a question. She nodded. "Yes." Another silence stretched between them. But unlike the silence she was used to back home, this one did not feel heavy. It felt thoughtful, almost peaceful. After a moment, he spoke again. "If you ever want to ride one of them, just ask." Her eyes widened slightly. "Ride? I have never done that." He gave a faint nod. "Then perhaps it is time you try." For the first time, she noticed something unusual. His voice, when he spoke to her, carried patience, almost carefulness, like someone afraid of breaking something fragile. She could not understand why, because in her mind there was nothing fragile about her life. But the old farm manager approached them just then. An elderly man with gray hair and steady hands. He had worked on the farm longer than anyone. He bowed his head slightly toward her. "Good afternoon, ma'am." Then he smiled in a way that felt oddly familiar. "You must forgive the house if it feels strange at first." "Strange," she repeated. He chuckled gently. Kindness often feels strange to people who have not received it before. She did not know how to answer that. So she looked away toward the horses. The manager studied her face quietly. Then he added something unexpected. "The master has been waiting for this day for a very long time." She turned back immediately. Waiting for what? But the old man only smiled again. For the house to finally feel complete. And with that, he walked away down the stable aisle, leaving her standing beside the horse. Confused, the farm owner said nothing. He simply watched the sunlight moving slowly across the stable floor. But one question had begun to grow quietly inside her mind. Why would a man like him, a wealthy landowner with a peaceful life, wait for someone like her? A girl who had spent her entire life believing she had no worth beyond the work she could offer. What did he know that she did not? And more importantly, why did it feel as if this farm, this house, and this man had been expecting her long before she ever arrived? What she could not yet see was that the answer to those questions had begun many years earlier, on a cold, rainy afternoon, when she was just a small, frightened girl, sitting alone outside her family's gate. Some memories fade with time. Others remain as sharp as the moment they happened. For her, that childhood memory had always been small, almost insignificant. Just one rainy afternoon. Just one, stranger. But for someone else, that same moment had changed the course of an entire life. And neither of them knew it yet. Years earlier, long before the farm, long before the marriage, long before either of them understood what their lives would become, there had been another storm. A smaller house stood at the edge of the village. The roof was old, the fence crooked, the paint peeling from the wooden walls. Inside the house, voices echoed loudly, the kind of voices that made children hold their breath. A crash came from the kitchen, ceramic shattering across the floor. A small girl stood frozen beside the table. Her hands trembled. At her feet lay the broken pieces of a white bowl. Her stepmother stared at the mess with narrowed eyes. "You cannot even hold a bowl properly." The girl opened her mouth to speak. "I am sorry." But the apology did not change anything. The stepmother grabbed the girl's arm and pulled her toward the door. Out! The door swung open. Rain poured from the gray sky. But the girl was already pushed outside. And before she could turn around, the door slammed shut behind her. The sound echoed through the small yard. She stood there for a moment, confused. Cold rain soaking through her thin dress. Inside the house, voices continued. But no one opened the door again. Slowly, the girl walked to the wooden gate. She sat down beside it, pulling her knees to her chest. Rainwater slid down her hair and into her eyes. At first, she tried not to cry. She had learned not to cry inside the house, because crying only made things worse. But out here in the rain with no one watching, the tears finally came. Quiet ones, the kind children cry when they already know no one is coming to comfort them. The road in front of the gate was nearly empty. Most people stayed indoors during storms like this. But footsteps eventually appeared along the muddy path. A boy. He looked slightly older than her. Maybe 12. He was carrying a small cloth bag, probably sent to the village store for supplies. As he walked past the gate, he noticed the girl sitting there. Most people might have looked away. Children sitting outside in the rain were not unusual in that part of town. But he stopped. The girl quickly wiped her face, embarrassed that someone had seen her crying. The boy said nothing at first. He simply looked at her for a moment. Not with pity, not with curiosity, just quiet attention. Then he opened the cloth bag. Inside was a loaf of bread wrapped in paper, still warm. He tore off a piece and stepped closer to the gate. Here. The girl looked up slowly. You can have it. She hesitated. People rarely gave her things. Are you sure? He nodded once. Yes. She reached out carefully, taking the warm piece of bread into her small hands. Steam still rose from it. For a moment, she simply stared at it. The warmth spread through her fingers. Then she took a bite. Her eyes closed slightly as she chewed. It tasted better than anything she had eaten in days. The boy watched quietly. You should eat slowly, he said. You might feel sick if you eat too fast. The girl nodded, trying to follow his advice. The rain softened around them. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then she asked softly, "Why are you helping me?" The boy shrugged slightly. "Because you looked hungry." The answer was simple, but for the girl it felt like something extraordinary. No one had ever said those words to her before. After a moment, he placed the rest of the bread beside her. "Keep it." Then he picked up his bag again. "Wait." The girl looked up quickly. "What is your name?" But the boy had already stepped back onto the road. He paused for just a moment, then shook his head slightly. "It does not matter." And with that he continued down the road. The girl watched him disappear through the falling rain. She never saw him again. At least that was what she believed. But that afternoon had stayed with her for years. Not because of the bread itself, but because it was the first time someone had shown her kindness without asking for anything in return. Sometimes the smallest kindness becomes the brightest memory in a difficult childhood. Perhaps some of you watching have a moment like that too. A single gesture, a small act of kindness that stayed with you long after everything else faded. Back in the present, years later, the young woman stood quietly in the farmhouse study. The room smelled faintly of leather and cedar wood. She had entered only because the door had been left slightly open. Sunlight streamed through the tall window. Dust particles floated in the air. The desk was neatly arranged, papers stacked carefully, a lamp resting beside a wooden box. She had not meant to look through anything. Truly. But the box caught her attention. It was old. The kind of box people keep for personal things. Memories. Without thinking, she stepped closer. The lid was not locked. Her fingers hesitated for a moment. Then, slowly lifted it open. Inside were a few simple objects. A piece of faded ribbon, a folded scrap of cloth, and something that made her breath stop. A broken piece of porcelain, white, with a small blue pattern along the edge. Her heart skipped. She picked it up slowly. It was unmistakable. The bowl, the one she had broken as a child, the one that led to her being thrown outside in the rain. Her hands trembled slightly. How could this be here? The bowl had shattered on the kitchen floor years ago. She was certain of it. Yet here was one of the pieces, carefully preserved, inside her husband's private study. Her mind raced. She looked back into the box. Underneath the porcelain fragment lay something else. A thin strip of cloth, faded red. She recognized that too. A ribbon she had once worn in her hair when she was small. Her chest tightened. Why would he have these? Why would anyone keep such things? Especially things connected to her. Footsteps sounded faintly in the hallway. She quickly placed the items back into the box, closing the lid gently. Her heart was still pounding when she stepped away from the desk. The questions filled her mind like storm clouds. Did he know her before the marriage? Had he been to her village years ago? But if he had, why had he never said anything? And more importantly, why keep these memories? The door behind her creaked softly. She turned quickly. The farm owner stood there. He had likely been looking for something in the study. But the moment he saw her expression, he understood something had happened. "Are you all right?" She tried to answer calmly. "Yes." But the word felt uncertain. He stepped closer. His eyes moved briefly to the wooden box on the desk, then back to her face. She realized immediately. He knew. "You can ask," he said quietly. The word surprised her. "Ask what?" "Anything you want." She hesitated, because there were many questions now. Too many. But the one that rose first was the simplest. "Why do you have those things?" For a moment he did not answer. His gaze shifted to the window. Sunlight touched the edge of the desk. And then he said something that made her heart tighten. "Because some memories are worth keeping, even when they belong to someone else." She stared at him, trying to understand, but the explanation she feared was beginning to form in her mind. And suddenly the room felt smaller, quieter, as if the past itself were standing between them. Inside her heart, a quiet promise began to form. A promise she had made to herself long ago. A promise born from years of disappointment. She would not depend on anyone. Not emotionally. Not completely. Because every time she had allowed herself to trust someone, that trust had been broken. So even though this man had shown her kindness, even though this farm felt safer than any place she had ever lived, she whispered silently to herself, "I will not let my heart belong to someone again. Not completely. Not even here." But the truth waiting to be revealed was far more complicated than she could imagine. Because the man she had married had never been a stranger, and the kindness she remembered from childhood had never truly disappeared. It had simply been waiting patiently for the right moment to return to her life again. For the next few days, the house remained quiet. Too quiet. Not uncomfortable. Not tense. Just calm in a way she was not used to. The workers continued their routines. The farm owner left early each morning to check the fields and returned before sunset. The cook prepared meals that always seemed to include something warm waiting for her. And yet something inside the young woman had begun to stir, not peace, restlessness, because the more kindness she received, the more uncertain she felt about her place in the house. A question followed her everywhere. What am I doing here? At night she lay awake staring at the ceiling. The soft bed felt unfamiliar, the silence too gentle. In the house she grew up in, quiet usually meant someone was angry. Here, quiet meant nothing was wrong. But that made her uneasy, because if nothing was wrong, then why was she still here? One morning she woke before sunrise again. The sky outside was still dark blue. The farm was quiet except for the distant sound of a horse shifting in the stable. She sat up slowly. Today she had made a decision. She would leave. Not because anyone forced her, because she did not belong here. She packed the same small suitcase she had brought to the farm. It took only a few minutes. Her life had never required many possessions. When she finished, she looked around the room one last time. The blankets, the warm lamp beside the bed, the window overlooking the fields. For a moment, something tugged gently at her chest, but she pushed the feeling aside. Better to leave now before she became used to something she could not keep. She lifted the suitcase and quietly walked down the hallway. The house was silent. No one noticed her. She reached the front door. Her hand touched the handle. Almost free. But just as she opened the door, a voice spoke behind her. Leaving so early. She froze. Slowly she turned around. The farm owner stood near the staircase. He had clearly been awake for some time. His coat was already on, boots prepared for the morning work. He looked at the suitcase, then back at her face. She felt suddenly exposed. I was not trying to sneak away, she said quickly. His expression remained calm. I did not say you were. A pause stretched between them. Finally, she spoke the truth. I do not belong here. He said nothing. She continued. This house is kind to me. Too kind. But it is not really my life. You did not marry someone like me because you needed a wife. So there is no reason for me to stay. The words came out steadier than she expected. She had spent many years accepting decisions made for her. But this time she was choosing something herself. He walked slowly toward the door, stopping only a few steps away from her. The early morning light touched his face through the window. If you leave, he said quietly, your family's debt will return. Her fingers tightened around the suitcase. The words hit like cold water. You said the debt was erased. It is. As long as you remain here. Anger rose inside her chest. So that is the truth, she said. You married me to keep control over me. He studied her carefully. No. Then why say that? Because it is true. If you walk away, the agreement ends. Her voice sharpened. So this marriage is nothing more than a contract. For a moment, the room felt heavier. But his answer came calmly. I married you to protect you. The words caught her off guard. Protect me from what? But he did not answer. Not yet. Instead, he stepped past her and opened the front door wider. Cold morning air drifted inside. You are free to go, he said. I will not stop you. But if you walk away, you will return to the same people who used you for years. The same people who would use you again. The words struck deeper than she expected. Because they were true. Still, she lifted the suitcase slightly. You do not get to decide my life for me. His voice remained steady. I am not deciding it. I am offering you a place where you are safe." She hesitated. Safe. It was a word she had rarely connected to herself. But the doubt inside her heart was stronger. Safety could disappear. Kindness could change. People could turn cold without warning. So she turned toward the open doorway, ready to step outside. Then he said something that stopped her again. "Breakfast is already on the table. You should eat before making a long decision." She blinked. That was not the response she expected. "You think breakfast will change my mind?" "No." He folded his arms loosely. "But people rarely make good decisions when they are hungry." For a moment she almost laughed. The tension in the room softened slightly. She looked down at the suitcase, then at the door, then back toward the kitchen. Finally, she exhaled slowly. "Fine. Just breakfast." He nodded once. "That is all I asked." They walked into the kitchen together. The cook greeted them with surprise. "Oh, good morning. You are both up early." The farm owner sat down calmly. The young woman placed her suitcase beside the chair, still unsure whether she would stay or leave after the meal. But as she sat down, something unexpected happened. A plate had already been prepared. Bread, eggs, and a small bowl of warm soup. She looked at it quietly. The farm owner noticed. "You should eat. It will get cold." She picked up a piece of bread. Steam rose gently from the surface. The warmth reminded her of something. Something distant. Rain. A gate. A boy offering bread with quiet kindness. She shook the memory away and took a bite. The cook smiled from the stove. "The master asked us to keep breakfast warm in case you woke early." Her eyes lifted slowly. He asked. The cook nodded. "Of course. He always makes sure your meal is ready." The young woman glanced toward him, but he had already started drinking his coffee, as if the conversation had nothing to do with him. That same strange feeling returned. He did not behave like someone who had married out of convenience, but he also did not act like a man trying to impress his new wife. Instead, he behaved like someone quietly adjusting the world around her, without asking for credit, without explaining. Later that afternoon, she walked through the farm again. The fields stretched peacefully toward the horizon. Workers repaired a fence near the barn. The air smelled of fresh hay. Her suitcase still sat in the hallway near the door. She had not touched it again. Maybe she was waiting for something, some explanation, some proof that this place was more than a temporary kindness. As she passed the stable, she overheard two workers talking near the water pump. Their voices were low but clear. "You remember the winter years ago," one of them said. The other nodded. Of course, that girl in the village almost froze outside her house. The young woman slowed her steps, listening. If the master had not arrived when he did, the first man continued, she might not have survived that night. Her heart skipped. She stepped closer without thinking. "What girl?" she asked. The two workers turned quickly, surprised to see her there. One of them scratched the back of his neck. "Oh, it was just a story from years ago, ma'am. About a child who got locked out during a storm. The master found her and made sure someone brought her inside." She stared at them. The world seemed to tilt slightly beneath her feet. "The master? You mean him?" The workers nodded. "Yes, he used to pass through that village often, always checking on things quietly." The young woman felt the air grow thinner, because suddenly a memory rose clearly in her mind. Rain, cold ground, and a boy standing beside the gate offering her warm bread. A boy who never gave his name. Could it be possible? Had the person who helped her that day, the only person who had shown her kindness in years, been the same man who now stood quietly beside her every morning? The thought felt impossible. And yet the questions were beginning to form. Because if that were true, then this marriage, this farm, this life she had stepped into was not an accident at all, but something far more intentional. And if that was true, then the man she had married had been protecting her for far longer than she had ever realized. After that afternoon, the farm no longer felt quite the same. Not because anything around her had changed. The same horses moved calmly in the stables. The same wind passed through the fields. The same quiet routines shaped each day. But inside her mind, something had shifted. A question had begun to follow her everywhere. Had he known her all along? Every time she saw the farm owner walking across the fields or speaking quietly with the workers, she studied him differently now. Not as a stranger. Not exactly as a husband either, but as a puzzle whose pieces she had only just begun to notice. Yet he behaved exactly the same. Calm, reserved, careful with his words. If he sensed her curiosity, he never mentioned it. Days passed, and small moments began to gather between them. Moments so ordinary that they almost felt invisible. But those were the moments that slowly changed the distance between two people. One morning she tried to help the stable hands repair a broken fence. She had already picked up a hammer when the farm owner approached. "You do not need to do that," he said. She glanced up. "Why not?" "Because you are not a worker here." She tightened the grip on the hammer. "I have repaired fences before." He considered this. "I do not doubt it." "Then let me help." The stable hands exchanged awkward looks. But before anyone could object, the farm owner simply said, "All right." "But only for an hour." She raised an eyebrow. "You are giving me a schedule now." He replied calmly, "I am preventing you from doing the entire job yourself." The faintest hint of amusement touched his voice. For a moment she almost smiled. Later that afternoon they walked together along the pasture where the horses grazed. Neither of them spoke much, but the silence felt easier than before. She noticed how carefully he listened whenever she did say something. Not interrupting, not dismissing, simply paying attention. It was such a small thing, yet it felt strangely unfamiliar. Back in the village, she had often spoken without anyone truly hearing her. Have you ever experienced that kind of silence? The silence where people hear your voice, but never your meaning? On the farm, the silence felt different. It felt like space. A place where words could exist without being pushed away. Still, not every moment was peaceful. Whispers from the nearby towns slowly reached the farm. Some villagers began to talk. They said she had married for money. They said the farm owner must have chosen her out of pity. They said a girl like her could never truly belong in a house like this. One afternoon, those whispers reached her ears directly. She had gone to the market to buy supplies with one of the workers. Two women stood near the vegetable stall. Their voices were quiet, but not quiet enough. Imagine becoming the wife of the richest man in the valley overnight. Some people are lucky. Lucky or clever, the other woman replied. She probably knew exactly what she was doing. The young woman stood very still beside the cart. Her face remained calm, but the old familiar feeling returned. The feeling that she had somehow taken something she did not deserve. That night she ate dinner quietly. The farm owner noticed. "Something happened in town?" he asked. She shook her head. "Just people talking." "What did they say?" She hesitated, then answered honestly, "That I married you for your money." The room grew quiet. Finally, he said, "People often say what helps them understand a situation. even if it is wrong. She looked at him carefully. Does it bother you? No. Because I know the truth. She lowered her gaze. The truth was still unclear to her. Another conflict came a few days later. Her younger sister arrived unexpectedly at the farm. She appeared at the gate wearing a bright dress and an impatient expression. The moment she stepped inside, she began speaking quickly. Father says the money you received was not enough. The young woman stared at her. Money? You married a rich man, the sister continued. Surely he can spare more to help the family. The words felt like a cold wind. I did not marry him for money, she said quietly. The sister laughed. Of course you did. Why else would he choose someone like you? Before the conversation could grow worse, the farm owner stepped into the courtyard. He had clearly heard the raised voices. The younger sister immediately changed her tone. Oh, sir, I was just telling my dear sister how proud the family is of her marriage. His expression remained neutral. I see. She smiled brightly. Perhaps we could discuss some financial assistance. He replied calmly. No. The answer was simple. Direct. The sister blinked. But surely, no, he repeated. Then he gestured toward the gate. You should return home. Your sister is not responsible for solving your family's problems. The sister's smile vanished. She turned toward the young woman with sharp eyes. You think you are better than us now? But the young woman said nothing. Because deep down she still feared her sister might be right. After the sister left, she stood quietly in the courtyard. The farm owner approached her slowly. You did not invite her here, he said. No. I know. She looked at the ground. They will probably come again. I know. The certainty in his voice surprised her. You sound like you expected this. He did not answer immediately. But something in his silence made her uneasy. Days passed again. Their quiet partnership on the farm continued. They repaired fences together, planted new trees near the western field, shared simple meals in the kitchen when the workers had already gone to bed. Slowly, warmth began to grow between them. Not sudden passion, not dramatic declarations, just a steady understanding. But the mystery surrounding him still remained. Then, one night, everything changed. The moon hung low over the farm. The house was quiet. She had gone to the hallway for water when she heard voices coming from the study. The door was slightly open. She recognized the voices. The farm owner and the old manager. She had not meant to listen. But one sentence stopped her. Do not allow her family near the farm again, the owner said quietly. The manager nodded. Of course. They will only cause trouble. He continued, I will handle them if necessary. She stood frozen in the hallway. Her chest tightened. Handle them. Her mind raced. Had he been controlling everything behind the scenes? Had he arranged the marriage, paid the debts, blocked her family from approaching? All without telling her. The realization felt overwhelming. The life she thought she had chosen suddenly seemed planned by someone else. That night, she packed her suitcase again. But this time her hands trembled, because the anger inside her heart was mixed with something else. Fear. If he had been shaping her life all along, then how much of her freedom was real? Before sunrise, she carried the suitcase toward the door once more. But this time he was already waiting, standing beside the table, as if he had known she would come. You heard the conversation, he said quietly. She did not deny it. Yes, her voice shook slightly. You have been controlling everything. My family, my debts, even this marriage. For a moment he said nothing. Then he spoke the words she had been waiting to hear. Yes. Her heart pounded. Why? Because someone had to protect you. The answer felt too simple. From what she demanded. From people who saw your kindness as weakness. From a world that would keep taking from you until nothing was left. Her anger surged. You had no right to decide that for me. I know. The calm honesty in his voice caught her off guard. But I could not stand by and watch them destroy your life. She stared at him. The room seemed to hold its breath. Finally, he spoke again. There is something you deserve to know. Years ago during a storm, a small girl was sitting outside a gate. Cold. Hungry. Alone. The words sent a chill through her chest. He continued slowly. I gave her a piece of warm bread. She felt the world tilt beneath her feet. He nodded once. Yes. I was the boy. Silence filled the room. Every memory from that rainy afternoon rushed back into her mind. The bread, the quiet kindness, the nameless boy who had walked away. All these years she believed that moment had vanished into the past. Yet here he stood. The same person. The same quiet eyes. I visited that village many times afterward, he continued. Just to make sure you were all right. But you never noticed. Her voice trembled. You watched me for years. Yes. Why? Because that day you thanked me for the bread. Even though you had nothing else. That moment stayed with me. He looked directly into her eyes. You were the kindest person I had ever met. Even when the world treated you unfairly. Tears gathered in her eyes before she could stop them. So everything, the farm, the marriage. Yes. I bought the land near your village so I could help if you ever needed it. When I learned about your family's debt, I arranged the marriage because it was the only way to protect you permanently. The truth hung in the air between them. Heavy. Unbelievable. The man she had thought was controlling her life had actually been protecting it. All along. But just as the weight of that truth began to settle, a new problem was already approaching. Because her family had not given up. And this time, they were returning with a plan that could threaten everything she had finally begun to build. The farm, the peace, and the fragile trust that had only just begun to grow between her and the man who had quietly loved her from the very beginning. The trouble arrived on a gray afternoon. Clouds rolled slowly over the valley, and a restless wind moved across the fields. Workers paused now and then to look toward the road leading to the farm gate. 3 wagons approached. Word traveled quickly through the farm. Visitors. Unwelcome ones. The young woman was in the garden when she heard the wheels grinding against the gravel path. She looked up and immediately recognized them. Her father, her stepmother, her younger sister, and 2 men from the village who often handled debts and land disputes. Her chest tightened. For years, the sight of them had meant only one thing: trouble. The wagon stopped just outside the gate. Her stepmother stepped down first, brushing dust from her dress as if she were arriving at a formal gathering rather than someone else's home. The younger sister followed, eyes scanning the farm with open curiosity. Finally, the father climbed down. His expression carried the same tired irritation she remembered from childhood. Workers gathered quietly at a distance. No one spoke. The young woman stood still near the garden path. For a brief moment, the old fear returned, the familiar instinct to lower her eyes, to apologize, to become small again. Then footsteps approached beside her. The farm owner. He did not rush. He simply walked to stand next to her, close enough that she could feel his presence. Not controlling, not possessive, just steady. The gate opened. Her stepmother entered first without waiting to be invited. "Well," she said loudly, "this place is even bigger than we imagined." Her eyes moved toward the young woman. "Look at you, living like a lady now." The words carried a sweetness that felt false. Her younger sister smirked. "We thought you might welcome your family." The farm owner spoke calmly. "Why are you here?" The stepmother placed a hand on her chest. Surely a family can visit their own daughter. But the young woman knew that tone. It meant the real request was still coming. The father stepped forward. "We came to discuss unfinished matters." "What matters?" The man from the village spoke next. "The debt." The farm owner looked at him without emotion. "The debt was settled months ago." The man nodded. "Yes, settled between you and the bank. But the family still deserves compensation." The young woman stared at them. "Compensation? For what?" "For raising you," the stepmother answered sharply. "For feeding you. For giving you a home all these years." The words echoed across the courtyard. Workers exchanged uncomfortable glances. The young woman's hands began to shake slightly, not from weakness. From years of buried anger she had never allowed herself to feel. The stepmother continued, "You may live here now, but do not forget where you came from. Without us, you would have nothing." For a moment the world seemed to return to the old pattern, the one where she remained silent, the one where their voices decided her value. But before she could speak, the farm owner stepped forward. "No," he said. His voice was calm, but the quiet authority inside it silenced the courtyard. "That is not true." The stepmother laughed lightly. "Oh, really?" He met her gaze directly. "You did not raise her. You used her." The father's face darkened. "Watch your words." But the farm owner did not step back. "For years," he continued, "she cooked your meals, washed your clothes, worked your fields, while your own daughter enjoyed the comfort she deserved." The younger sister's smile faded. The stepmother's voice hardened. "And how would you know so much about our household?" "Because I watched." The answer stunned everyone. Even the young woman turned toward him. "You what?" He continued calmly. "I passed through that village many times over the years. Every time I saw the same thing. A girl carrying more responsibility than any child should." The father scoffed. "That is called family duty." "No," he replied. "It is called neglect." The courtyard fell silent. The farm owner looked toward the men from the village. The debt was paid, legally and completely. "If you attempt to claim more money from her again, you will deal with me." The man shifted uncomfortably. The stepmother stepped closer to the young woman. "You hear how he speaks," she said bitterly. "Like you are something valuable." Her voice sharpened. "But we both know the truth. You have always been useless." For years, those words had shaped her life. Useless. A burden. Someone who existed only to serve. But something inside her had changed since arriving at the farm. She had learned what it felt like to be greeted with respect, to be asked what she wanted, to be treated like her existence mattered. And suddenly she understood something important. Those years had not defined her. They had only hidden who she really was. Her hands stopped shaking. Slowly, she stepped forward, standing beside the farm owner, facing the people who had shaped her childhood. For the first time in her life, she did not lower her eyes. "No," she said quietly. The stepmother frowned. "What did you say?" The young woman's voice grew stronger. "You did not raise me. You tolerated me. The courtyard seemed to hold its breath. The father stared at her as if seeing a stranger. "You lived in our house." "Yes." She nodded. "And I worked in that house every day. But you never treated me like your daughter." The younger sister crossed her arms. "So now you think you are better than us?" The young woman looked directly at her. "No. I simply know my worth now." The words surprised even her. But they felt true. The stepmother laughed bitterly. "Your worth comes from his money. Without him, you would still be nothing." The young woman felt the farm owner's hand gently touch hers. Not pulling, not guiding, just present. And she realized something important in that moment. She was not holding his hand because she needed rescue. She was holding it because she wanted to stand beside him. "I am not staying here because he saved me," she said calmly. "I am staying because I choose this life." The stepmother's face twisted with anger. "You belong to us." The young woman shook her head slowly. "No." For the first time in her life, she spoke the words she had always been too afraid to say. "I do not belong to that family anymore." The silence that followed felt powerful. The men from the village shifted uncomfortably. The father looked away. Even the stepmother seemed unsure what to say next. Finally, the farm owner spoke. "The conversation is finished." The men from the village quickly agreed. "Yes. It would be best if we returned to town." One by one, they climbed back into the wagons. The younger sister left without another word. The father avoided looking at her. The stepmother paused last. Her voice was low. "You will regret this one day." But the young woman simply watched as the wagon rolled away down the road. And for the first time, the past did not follow her. When the dust settled, the farm workers quietly returned to their tasks. The courtyard slowly returned to normal. The young woman exhaled deeply. Her legs felt weak. Not from fear, from the emotional weight of what had just happened. The farm owner looked at her. "Are you all right?" She nodded. Then something unexpected happened. She laughed softly. "I think I am." He studied her face carefully. For the first time since she arrived, the sadness that had once lived behind her eyes seemed lighter, as if something heavy had finally been removed. "You were very brave," he said. She shook her head. "No, I was just honest." They stood together quietly in the fading afternoon light. The wind moved gently across the fields. And somewhere in the distance, a horse neighed softly. For the first time in her life, the young woman felt something new. Not fear, not obligation, but belonging. Not the kind forced by family, the kind chosen freely. And that choice had changed everything. Because the story that began with loneliness was finally moving towards something warmer. Something she had once believed was impossible. A life where she was not useful, not tolerated, but truly valued. And the man who had once given her a piece of warm bread in the rain had quietly been waiting all these years for the day she would finally believe that herself. Winter slowly gave way to spring. The valley changed in quiet ways first. Snow melted along the edges of the fields. Small streams returned beside the road. The air softened, carrying the smell of wet soil and new grass. On the farm, the days grew longer. Workers repaired fences damaged by winter winds. New seeds were planted across the fields. And the horses spent more time outside, running across the open pasture with restless energy. Life was beginning again. For the young woman, the change of season felt almost symbolic. A few months earlier, she had arrived at the farm on a cold, rainy night with a single suitcase and a heart that expected very little from the world. Now she walked through the same fields with steady steps. Not as a guest, not as someone passing through, but as someone who belonged. Yet the change had not happened suddenly. It had grown quietly, like spring itself. Every morning she woke without the old fear that someone would shout her name from the hallway. She no longer rushed out of bed to avoid being called lazy. Instead, she often stepped outside and watched the sunrise across the pasture. Sometimes the farm owner joined her. Other mornings he was already in the fields by the time she woke. Either way, the day began peacefully. The workers on the farm had also grown comfortable around her. At first, they had spoken carefully, respectfully, unsure how a new mistress of the house might behave. But as weeks passed, they discovered something unusual. She asked their names. She remembered them. She listened when they spoke. When someone worked late, she brought water or food. Not because she was expected to, but because she understood what it felt like to work without recognition. One afternoon, the old farm manager found her near the barn helping organize supplies. He leaned against the doorframe, watching quietly for a moment. "You know," he said gently, "most people in your position would not be doing that work." She smiled slightly. "Old habits are difficult to break." He shook his head. "Perhaps, but that is not what I mean." She looked at him curiously. "You treat people differently than most landowners. I spent years working beside people who barely noticed the workers around them. You notice everything." She thought about that. Maybe it was because she had once been invisible herself. After a moment, she asked the question that had been resting in her mind for weeks. "Did he really watch over me all those years?" The old manager understood immediately who she meant. "Yes." His answer came without hesitation. "Long before you arrived here." She looked toward the distant fields where the farm owner was speaking with the stable hands. Why did he never say anything? The manager smiled softly. Because he believed kindness should never feel like a debt. She absorbed those words slowly. Kindness, without expectation. Perhaps that was why the memory of the bread had remained so powerful all those years. It had never been offered with conditions. It had simply been given. Later that evening, the farm owner returned from the fields as the sun dipped low behind the hills. The sky turned warm shades of gold and orange. She was standing beside the wooden fence watching the horses. "You seem thoughtful," he said as he approached. She glanced toward him. "I spoke with the manager today, and he told me more about you." He waited. "You visited my village many times," she continued. "Just to check on me." He nodded slightly. "Yes. Why did you not ever speak to me again?" He rested his arms on the fence beside her. "Because you were happy that day." The answer confused her. "Happy? When you took the bread, you smiled." He looked out across the field. "I did not want to interfere with your life after that. I simply wanted to make sure you were safe." She watched him quietly. For a man who had done so much, he never spoke as if it were important. "Do you regret it?" she asked softly. "Waiting all those years?" The question lingered between them. Finally, he turned toward her. "No." His voice carried quiet certainty. "Because some things are worth waiting for." The wind moved gently across the pasture. The horses grazed peacefully nearby. And for a moment, the world felt perfectly still. Later that night, the farmhouse settled into its usual quiet rhythm. The cook finished cleaning the kitchen. Workers returned to their cottages. Lanterns dimmed across the property. The young woman stepped into the kitchen for a glass of water. And there on the wooden table, she saw something that made her pause. A small plate, with a piece of warm bread, steam still rising slightly from the surface. She smiled before she even realized it. Behind her, footsteps approached. The farm owner leaned against the doorway. "You are smiling," he observed. She picked up the bread. "Did you do this on purpose?" He raised an eyebrow. "Perhaps." She took a small bite. The taste was simple, fresh, warm. It immediately brought back the memory of that rainy afternoon many years ago. Except this time the feeling was different. Back then, the bread had been survival, a small kindness in a lonely moment. Now it felt like something else. A reminder, a symbol of how far her life had come. "You know," she said thoughtfully, "this used to mean something very different to me." He waited. "When you gave it to me that day, it meant someone had noticed me, just once. And that was enough to carry me through years of loneliness." She looked at the bread again. "But now it means something else." "What?" She met his eyes. "Now it reminds me that kindness can grow into something much bigger than a single moment." He studied her expression carefully. "And what does it mean to you now?" She thought about the answer for a moment, then said quietly, "It means I was never as alone as I believed." The words settled gently in the room. He stepped closer to the table. "For years," he said, "I hoped one day you would realize that." She smiled softly. "Well, it took me a while." He gave a small nod. "But you arrived eventually." They stood there together in the warm kitchen light. Two people whose lives had quietly intertwined long before either of them fully understood it. Outside the window, the first blossoms of spring moved gently in the night breeze. And for the first time in many years, the young woman felt completely at peace with her past. Because she finally understood something important. The years of loneliness had not been meaningless. They had simply been the path that led her here. To a place where kindness was not rare, where her voice mattered, and where the small piece of warm bread that once saved her on a rainy afternoon had become something much greater. Not just survival, but the beginning of love. Sometimes the things that rescue us from our darkest moments are not grand miracles. Sometimes they are quiet gestures. A warm piece of bread, a patient heart, and someone who chooses to stand beside us, not because we need saving, but because they believe we deserve to be valued. And in the end, that belief had changed both of their lives forever. Thank you for staying with this story until the very end. In the rush of everyday life, taking a few quiet moments to listen to a story like this can feel like a gentle pause for the heart, a space where we can slow down and reflect on the small, meaningful things that often go unnoticed. After walking through the journey of this young woman, what lingers is not just the events themselves, but the quiet feeling they leave behind. A reminder that some of the most important changes in our lives begin very quietly. Not with grand gestures or dramatic moments, but with a single act of kindness that arrives when we least expect it. For many years, she believed that her worth existed only in what she could do for others. She had learned to measure her value through work, sacrifice, and silence. Yet slowly, day by day on that quiet farm, she began to discover something new. There are places in this world where you do not have to prove that you deserve to be there. Places where your presence alone is enough. Sometimes life does not change because of a miracle. Sometimes it changes because of something very small, a warm piece of bread on a rainy afternoon, a patient heart that never stopped believing in you, or a person who quietly stayed nearby while you were still learning how to believe in yourself. What makes this story beautiful is not simply that she found a home. It is that she rediscovered herself. The girl who had once been told she was useless. The girl who had spent years believing she did not belong anywhere. Slowly learned to stand tall and say, perhaps for the first time in her life. I know my worth. And perhaps many of us understand that journey more than we realize. There are moments in life when we feel invisible. When we feel as though our presence only matters when someone needs something from us. But the truth is that those moments do not define who we are. They are only chapters, not the whole story. Maybe somewhere in your own life, there has also been a small moment of kindness you never forgot. A simple gesture from someone who noticed you when the world seemed to look away. Something small that stayed in your memory long after everything else faded. Often, we think those moments disappear with time. But sometimes they grow quietly in the background of our lives, shaping paths we cannot yet see, guiding us toward places and people we never expected to find. If this story leaves us with anything, perhaps it is this gentle reminder: kindness never truly disappears. Even the smallest act can travel further than we imagine, reaching someone's life years later in ways we may never fully understand. So if today feels uncertain, or if you are still searching for where you belong, keep walking forward with patience. Life has a way of unfolding slowly, often revealing its meaning only after we have traveled much farther than we planned. Because somewhere along the road ahead, there may already be a small light waiting for you, a quiet kindness, a new beginning, or a place where you will finally feel at home. And when that moment arrives, you might look back and realize something very simple, yet very profound. Sometimes the thing that carries us through the coldest storms of our lives is not something grand at all, just a little warmth that someone once chose to share with us.